World War One started in 1914, and it took 4 years in 1918 for this to play out. 4 years long war. It involved several countries, and there were over 17 million people that died throughout all these countries. U.S. actually was in the war near the end, and we lost about 100,000 people to this war. So let's talk about this. There are several reasons why this war could have started, and as you know, we're talking about European history. This is a war for the continent of Europe. Not every country was involved in Europe, but a majority of the land in Europe was a battlefield. There was a lot of countries that were participating in this. So what I mean by that is several of the inhabitants in Europe were involved in this in some way. First thing you need is you need sides. So if every country was just, if it was just every country for themselves, it probably wouldn't be much of a war. It would just be like, it wouldn't be much of a world war. It'd be just like a disagreement. But the way things were set up, there were alliances set up. There were agreements set up between countries that if you get into trouble, I'm going to back you up. Some other people may have had secret alliances that other countries didn't know about, that, hey, we're not going to try to do anything to provoke anyone, but if something happens, we're together on this. And you can even probably see that whenever y'all go outside and play games outside. You may have little alliances here and there in that game. So that was one of the things that made it to be a world war. They have a name for this: mutual defense alliances. So I'm going to read a little bit about that. Countries throughout the world have always made mutual defense agreements with their neighbors. Those are treaties that could pull them into battle. These treaties meant that if one country was attacked, the allied countries were bound to defend them. Before World War I began, the following alliances existed. So this is pre-1914. Russia and Serbia were an alliance. Germany and Austria-Hungary were an alliance. France and Russia were an alliance. Britain and France and Belgium were an alliance. And Japan and Britain were an alliance. Now, if you want to see this on a map, go to your SharePoint, go to Content Library, then click on European History. In that, I have shared a couple of maps with you. One of them shows the divisions between the two sides in the World War One, in World War One, and it shows different colors. The other will actually show you where battles happened. So we'll probably get into that later. But that would be a good thing to have up, because we're not as familiar with these countries, as we would be, like, say, states in the United States of America. So if you need a map or something, pull those up. Also, a quick Google search will give you tons of maps on this, like Europe in 1914 or something like that. Now, at this time, Europe looks different than what it looks now. There were some things that happened in World War I that changed the land. So Germany looks a lot different. The country of Germany looks a lot different back then than it does now. You'll probably notice that too. So here's what happened in a nutshell. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, Russia got involved to defend Serbia. Okay? So you've got Austria-Hungary and Serbia going at it. Russia says, we're going to jump on in here and we're going to defend Serbia. Germany then, seeing that Russia was mobilizing, declared war on Russia. France was then drawn in against Germany and Austria-Hungary. Germany attacked France by marching through Belgium, pulling Britain into the war. Then Japan entered the war to support its British allies. Later, Italy and the United States would enter on the side of the Allies. So what we have is we have one side of the Allies, which is Serbia, Russia, France, Britain, Japan, and later Italy and US. The other side we call the Central Powers, and that is Austria-Hungary, Germany, and what we call the Ottoman Empire, which used to be where present-day Turkey is and some other areas around there. The Ottoman Empire is something that had been there for a long, long time, like close to 400 or 500 years. But they had what they did was they had a secret alliance with Germany, and they got pulled into the war as well. And for them, it led to their demise. So, in a nutshell, that's what it is. And like I said, if you look at those maps, you'll see the different countries in different colors. It makes it a little bit easier to notice. That's the first reason for the war. The second reason that the World War happened was imperialism. Okay? So what is imperialism? Imperialism is when a country increases their power and wealth by bringing additional territories under their control, usually without outright colonizing or resettling them. Before World War I, several European countries had made competing imperialistic claims in Africa and parts of Asia. Remember, Europe, especially Lower Europe, is right next to Africa, and then Eastern Europe is right next to Asia. So a lot of those places, some of these European countries were going in there, and where is it? So they'll control some of those territories to gain the wealth and the resources in those places. So there was definitely some contention there with some of these countries because, well, let me just read it off and then I'll tell you. The raw materials, because of the raw materials these areas could provide, tensions around the country had the right to exploit, tensions on which country had the right to exploit these areas ran high. The increasing competition and desire for greater empires led to an increase in confrontation that helped push the world into World War I. So there was definitely some greed there. These countries wanted to expand their territories, but with, they wanted to get better resources, and with that, other countries didn't like the fact that they were doing that because they knew that if another country got bigger and more powerful, it may mean something for them, like they wouldn't be able to stand up against that country. So there was contention there. We've covered two. Let's cover number 3 reason for the World War I. Militarism, okay? As the world entered the 20th century, which is the 1900s, an arms race had begun, primarily over the number of each country's warships and the increasing size of their armies. Countries began training more and more of their young men to prepare for battle. The warships themselves increased in size, number of guns, speed, methods of propulsion. The word propulsion basically means to move forward, so they found better ways to operate, and quality armor, beginning in 1906 with Britain's HMS Dreadnought. The Dreadnought. That's a great name. That was one of their warships, and it was one of the feared warships. It was something that they had made that definitely scared some people. But Dreadnought was soon outclassed as the Royal Navy and Kaiserliche Marine quickly expanded their ranks with increasingly modern and powerful warships. By 1914, start of the war, Germany had nearly 100 warships and 2 million trained soldiers. Great Britain and Germany both greatly increased their navies in this time period. Further, in Germany and Russia particularly, the military establishment began to have greater influence on public policy. This increase in militarism helped push the countries involved into war. Pretty self-explanatory. There's a lot of new technologies in war by this time. There's actually a whole change in warfare. They're going from the hand-to-hand combat style to weapons, gas attacks and things like that. Everything's changing in this war, and so military is as big of an issue as it ever has been, technology-wise. Our fourth reason for World War I starting is nationalism. Nationalism. Much of the origin of the war was based on the desire of the Slavic peoples in Bosnia and Herzegovina to no longer be a part of Austria-Hungary, but instead be a part of Serbia. So if you'll notice on that map, Austria-Hungary takes up a pretty big amount, the map I sent you on SharePoint, pretty big amount of space. At the very bottom left of that is a place called, is the place that they took over, that was Bosnia. Well, they didn't want to be a part of Austria-Hungary anymore. They were right next to Serbia. So that's whenever you hear about Bosnia, Bosnia is part of Austria-Hungary, but they didn't want to be a part of Austria-Hungary anymore. I think it was like 1909 or something was when they actually became a part of Austria-Hungary. Okay, so the Slavic peoples in Bosnia and Herzegovina no longer wanted to be a part of Austria-Hungary, but instead be a part of Serbia, which was right next to them. This specific essentially nationalistic and ethnic revolt led directly to the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, which was the event that tipped the scales of the war. But more generally, nationalism in many of the other countries throughout Europe contributed not only to the beginning, but to the extension of the war across Europe and into Asia. As we said before, a lot of the land changed up after this World War. So nationalism, being a part of a nation and where your nation extends and how much power your nation has, that had a big impact on this war as well. They were still forming. Europe, it was different than what it is today. It was still forming. As each country tried to prove their dominance and power, the war became more complicated and prolonged. All right, so final cause of World War I was the assassination, and we just talked about this, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This is the spark that led to the fire. The immediate cause of World War I that made the aforementioned items come into play. Whenever you hear that word aforementioned, it basically means what was mentioned before. Was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. In June 1914, a Serbian nationalist terrorist group called the Black Hand sent groups to assassinate the Archduke. Their first attempt failed when a driver avoided a grenade thrown at their car. However, later that day, a Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip shot the Archduke and his wife while they were driving through Sarajevo, Bosnia, which was part of Austria-Hungary. They died of their wounds. Something to know about, the Black Hand sent someone to go assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and he was the heir of Austria-Hungary. So, he was the heir to the throne. So that's a big assassination. And he, yes, they were driving through Bosnia. And so, this whole thing about Bosnia wanting to be a part of Serbia, well, a Serbian nationalist went and assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So there's something going on there that is threatening their nationalism, threatening the land that they took over, that Austria-Hungary took over. So obviously, it's more than just an assassination. It's almost like a statement. So that was also part of the reason why it was such a big deal. The assassination was in protest to Austria-Hungary having control of this region. Serbia wanted to take over Bosnia and Herzegovina. The assassination of Ferdinand led to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia. So they were the first ones to actually declare war then. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, the place right next to them, the country right next to them. When Russia began to mobilize to defend its alliance with Serbia, remember, Russia had an alliance with Serbia, so they were obligated to defend Serbia. Germany then declared war on Russia. So Russia's in there with Serbia. Well, Germany says, well, we're going to declare war on Russia, and we're going to be on the side of Austria-Hungary. And so then you already have 4 players. And, as we talked about at the very start, then everything just starts snowballing. More people join, more countries join. Thus began the expansion of the war to include all those other involved in the mutual defense alliances. So it just took one spark, and then all these